YouTube. Hello, folks. My name is Timothy Adon. Welcome to Joystick Jams. And today we are hopefully going to discuss orchestration in DAWs. It's just me today. In 2 weeks, the next stream is going to be me and Noel, and we're going to be doing sound design. But for today, we're going to write some music and we're going to talk about the basics of orchestration. As long as everything works. Literally up until 2 minutes ago, I was troubleshooting why OBS wasn't getting my musical audio. So hold on, we're going to test something really quick. Also, if anybody is here, if you could tell me if the music that was playing just now was crackly for you, because it was crackly for me. I don't know why. Basically, everything's breaking. Ooh, that's crackly too. That's probably a me thing. I doubt that that's affecting you. But I won't know until I look at the VOD. Or somebody speaks up. Who knows? But anyways, we're going to talk about orchestration. Now, people outside of music probably don't know what orchestration is, or they assume that it is more or less the same skill as music composition. And that is partially correct. Other people that are in music will think that orchestration is merely taking non-orchestral music like a rock and pop song and then rewriting it for orchestra, which is also not wrong. Both of those things are true. But what orchestration actually is the arranging of a piece of music for orchestra. That can be rewriting something that's not originally meant for orchestra, like a rock or pop song, but it is also a skill for general music composition, like for classical music and the like. It is utilizing the tools within an orchestra to convey emotion. That is orchestration. And I know that that particular definition sounds like it's just music composition. And most of the time, composers like myself do both of those things at the same time. You are writing the music and you are orchestrating it. But in some cases, those are in fact two separate skills. You can actually get a job just as an orchestrator. There are, I'm not going to name names, but there are famous composers who make enough money at this point that they will simply jot down a melody and maybe a chord progression, and then they will hand that to their army of lackeys, who will then actually orchestrate it, with the famous composer having very little actual hand in how that goes. So just to kind of give you an example. But it gets a little bit more complex than that, because there are a lot of pieces to an orchestra. There are wind instruments of several varieties. There's the brass instruments. There's many different kinds of percussion. And then invariably, an orchestra is going to have an enormous, make sure my sound is still going, enormous string section. And each of those sections has a different part to play and sounds different and in certain situations, and can be played in different fashions that also evoke different sounds. And orchestration is essentially taking a simple idea and then spreading it across an orchestra in order to convey a greater emotion. And in ye olden times, pre Beethoven, it was just an orchestra, and a lot of times it was just a chamber orchestra, very small. Beethoven was the one that made orchestras really, really big. And also back then, orchestration was purely for an orchestra. Beethoven was, if I am remembering my music history correctly, the first one to write music that combined both a full orchestra and a full choir. That wasn't for an opera. And so he was also then the first one to orchestrate for said style of music. And so when you get into the modern day, orchestration can include more than just your regular orchestra. Obviously, when you talk about orchestration, an orchestra is going to be included. But now in the modern day with electric instruments and synthesizers and the like, orchestration will also include said rock instruments, drum sets, instruments from all around the world that are not traditionally Western instruments, as well as synthesizers and the like, including things that you can really only do on a computer. So where does that fit in for you and me when it comes to working in a DAW? Let me adjust the camera a little bit because I'm not. That's better. So how does that affect you and me? Well, let me show you how I do this, and I'm going to work through like what you might want to do but don't necessarily need to. A lot of this is personal preference and just kind of how I like to work, with a couple caveats in mind. So we're gonna go right here. So I have in Reaper I have a template that, so when I open it, it'll just pop open with a bunch of tracks already put in, and it is quite a few tracks. So in here I have several instances of East West's Play open, and I have one instance for each set of instruments. So I've got one for woodwinds, one for brass, one for percussion, one for strings, a lot of which is already named, and then one for choir just in case. And within each of those, I have several other tracks underneath, based on what I presume I will most likely need. And then I will create more tracks as needed. I have several instances of Play open because I can only have 16 instruments loaded in each instance of Play. And it also helps me keep everything segregated so I know where everything is. Now, I have it in this specific layout because this is the layout that it will show up on a written musical score. And so once I have all of my music written, I can export the MIDI data and import it into a music notation software, and then from there I can kind of clean it up, and it'll already more or less be in the order that I need it to be. But that's not something you have to do. I do it, well, I mean, I did it because I was in school for it, and then I needed to put music into notation software, and so this was the workflow that I chose for class. But now I'm just going to keep it because it helps. As someone who was in a band, in band class playing a brass instrument, it helps in my brain keep everything together. Plus, should I at some point in the future manage to get my music played by an orchestra, it means that it'll be easy enough for me to start transitioning the MIDI data to a notation software to again get it cleaned up and then put out and written in a fashion that is readable by performers. what do I need to talk about next? The next thing I need to talk about, I guess, is roles is not necessarily the right word to use for this. I guess considerations. If you're trying to make your music using sampled instruments like these East-West libraries, sound, if you're going to make them sound realistic, you need to know how instruments behave and how the samples are meant to emulate an orchestra. So I don't know if you've ever seen an orchestra, but an orchestra is usually laid out. The woodwinds are up front. It is generally one of the smallest sections in the orchestra is the woodwinds, and they're right up front. And then right behind them is the brass instruments. You've got your trumpets and your trombones, etc. And then behind them will be the 50 some odd string instruments. And then behind all of those will be the percussion. The reason this is important is because the amount of power, I'm going to use power for in lieu of the word volume here. The amount of power generated by woodwinds is significantly smaller than that of the sections behind them. And that becomes very important when it comes to in the real world, the meat world, outside of a DAW. You have to then write your instrument. You have to write your music in a way that makes all the instruments that are playing audible in whatever method that winds up being. Because if the entire string section is playing, you are very unlikely to hear the flutes that are playing in the front. So orchestration is about writing in a way that handles that. However, when you're in a DAW, trying to emulate that becomes a little bit more difficult because it becomes extremely easy to either A, simply increase the volume knob, which changes the ratio of realism to what's the word? Realism to utility. Skews the realism to utility ratio in favor of utility. In addition, if you are playing with samples and you play two notes at the same time, you are essentially doubling the number of instruments playing. So let me take an example here. Strings. I've already got a sample loaded up, but let me get a better sample for this. Let's grab violins. Long, and a basic sus vibrato. Okay, so this is 11 violins, is what this sample is. Now, if I were to play two notes at once, I now all of a sudden have 22 violins. So you kind of see the problem with how this works, and that's kind of why I have this set up. In a general orchestra, you have two violin sections, violin 1 and violin 2, followed by viola and then cello and then contrabass. And so I usually will have different samples so that I can have two separate sections, and also make sure that if I'm going to be splitting, I do it sparingly, and I try to adjust the volume in those areas if I'm going for realism. And again, if you're not going for realism, it's no big deal. because orchestration's not just about covering for the volume needs of the instruments. It is also for see, this I talk very fast, and then my mouth gets ahead of where my brain is. And so now my brain is like a couple blocks back. Orchestration is also about picking the proper articulation for the job. Now, this violin instrument that I chose was 11 sustained vibrato violins. Just I can hold down the key, and depending on your sample library, it will either hold for a very long time before fading out, or it will be on a loop and play forever. But there are other articulations that violins can play. If we go to short, we've got some of my favorite, which is not this one. This one. There it is. Which is pizzicato. I should have grabbed some water. And so orchestration winds up being about picking the right instruments for the right job, depending on the music that you are trying to create emotions for. And again, a lot of music composition is doing music composition and orchestration at the same time. But it's helpful to know what the rules are, so that you can use the rules or break the rules to your advantage. So, like, orchestration is a skill that you don't necessarily need to have when it comes to music composition, but it really helps to at least know what some of the fundamentals are. That rhythm that I just created there. So we're actually going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how it is that I do this. So I have this, and this is going to be channel 1. And the way that I have this set up is I have a track that actually has the instrument in it. And then I have these tracks, which are the outputs. So violin 1 is 1, 2, violin 2 is going to be 3, 4. And then underneath each of these, I make, this is going to be violin pizzicato. Stick it right there. That should be fine. And I want my input. Put that there. There it is. And then what I do is I have this track be where I put the where I play my keyboard, and then I send it. I send that data to the strings track, which is where my instrument is. And then I make sure that it is sending to the correct channel. And now, this is my pizzicato track, which is getting sent to strings, which is then sending the audio to violin 2. And that is how I usually... And now we're going to record that. Let me Also, if you hear doubles, the issue that I was having was OBS didn't want to listen to voice meter, and voice meter is where I send my DAW audio in order to specifically go to OBS so OBS can hear it. But it didn't want to hear it. So instead, I sent the voice meter audio to my secondary monitor, which has speakers. And it's quiet enough that at least I can't hear it, except apparently the metronome. And then I'm having OBS listen to the secondary monitor. Streaming DAWs is a nightmare. And it doesn't need to be that way, but that's how people have designed it, and I don't understand. But anyways. Dun, dun, dun. Okay. So you might hear stuff going on over there. Yeah. We'll just keep it with that. Hearing the double of the metronome over there was really distracting me. And then we'll quantize this. Here, we're just going to add one more. Do. There we go. And then we will glue this, and then we can loop it. And that's great. Oops. I saved, but I don't have a thing for this yet. Yeah, you know what? Sure. So one of the things to consider when you're orchestrating is if you're going to have multiple instruments play, you want to try to make sure that the instruments that are playing are, one, different registers. Because if I were to have, say, a harp playing at this same exact register of notes at the same frequencies, the pizzicato, violins, and the harp would just kind of blend together. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you want the two instruments to stand out, then they need to be playing in a completely different register. And more likely than not, you'll also want them to be playing in a call and response fashion. But more likely than that, if you're going to have multiple instruments playing, you want them to be different registers, and you want them to have a timbre is not the word I'm looking for. But ideally, you want it to be playing in a different fashion. So this is what would be considered a very short note. It's a plucky note. It has a set duration for how long it's going to play. Unlike if a violin is bowed, it could be a single note could be played theoretically indefinitely. But if we pluck a string on a violin, it has a set ending. And we know that it has a set ending, and it should be predictable. So what we're going to do is we're going to go a little nuts. We're going to go up to the woodwinds. And we're going to put in clarinets. It's going to be channel 1. So normally the order of things here is it's flutes, oboe, clarinet. There could be some differences here depending on if you're using other types of flutes. Like if you're using a piccolo, I'm pretty sure piccolo goes above flute. Again, things you don't actually have to worry about, but it helps me when I'm writing. So if it's clarinet, clarinet goes into 5/6. Clarinet sus. Oh no, clarinet is sus. And I need you to be sent to woodwinds. You're going to channel 1. Okay. Let's see what we can get out of this. Okay. So a lot of that was, I mean, I don't even have a key decided on this yet. I'm just kind of doodling. But it didn't sound bad. Do-do-do-do. All right. There. We'll just leave it like that. So the other thing to consider is call and response. So we have this other section. And ideally, if you're doing call and response, you want it to be similar. I don't know what that move was. Similar. And so we could do another plucky string. Like a really good candidate would be like a cello or bass pizzicato. But I think what we're going to do instead, because again, it's fun to be crazy, is to go up to the brass. Now, things to look out for the brass before I go on. Every group of instruments has a kind of role that it plays within the orchestra. Woodwinds are very typically light and airy, as you would expect for something called a woodwind. While brass is loud and boisterous and like somewhat heroic. And strings kind of play a middle role where it can be anything. Strings can play with the woodwinds, strings can play with the brass. It is very much a supporting role that is meant to beef up the sound of an orchestra. French horns are a brass instrument, but because of the mellow and quiet tone of a French horn, it fits well in both a woodwind and a brass role. And that's a very interesting thing to think about, because if I remember correctly, your typical French horn section is consisted of 6 French horns. Because French horns are quiet, unless they're trying to play loud. They are quiet until they are not. And because of their very mellow tone, they blend in really well with woodwinds. But if you're playing like a fortissimo, very loud, heroic section, French horns can also play that role as well. So they're very... they're very... I can't... I'm talking too fast and my brain can't do it. Versatile. That's the word I'm looking for. So I'm very tempted to use French horns, and French horns are the first thing that show up on a traditional orchestral score in the brass section, because it's close to the woodwinds, because it fills the same role. After that would be trumpets, and then trombones, and then tuba. The other thing to think about when it comes to brass instruments is that because there are different extensions that you can put into brass instruments, and in this case I'm talking about mutes, you can change their role within an orchestra very easily. So if I were to do muted trumpets, I think it would fit very well with my pizzicato violins. So we are going to grab... Oop. Give me 1 second. I think my USB port got jiggled a little bit. Take a gander here. Yeah, my USB port got jiggled. Are you gonna... Oh, did this get touched? Okay, yeah. The power cable on my external hard drive is a little touchy. Which is unfortunate. I'm really hoping to upgrade to a desktop, and then a lot of the external plugin problems that I have will be a thing of the past. No more shall we deal with the horrors of connection issues. Brass, trumpets. Nope, short. And we're going to do mute staccato. We played on channel 1, and it is out 3/4. Oh, I need to actually have you sent over there, otherwise it won't work. So let's go ahead and... Alright, so that's where it's going to be playing. I'm going to start a little ahead, because I am not... because of how I have my setup currently, I need to tilt my laptop screen down so that I can reach over to my keyboard. I suppose I can... Oops. Okay, there we go. I can do that. Okay. Now, unfortunately, call and response here is a little hard because of how I made this melody. So what I can do... is copy this and paste it, and then... or just play faster. Okay, yeah. Let's delete that and try to and do it again. I lost track of what I wanted to do there, but that's honestly pretty good. Yeah, there we go. And so we have two mostly different, different toned instruments playing in a call and response. Now, if we were to... Let's have a third section here. Oh, what is this? Get out of there. Now, we could simply have these two be the same roll, but at different octaves, and that could change the tone of this section. But then, of course, we have to contend with the fact that trumpets can be very obnoxious. There we go. And this is how you make these sections sound bigger, is you start taking these ideas and you double them up. So we have, now for this third section, we have the violins and the trumpets playing the same rhythm, which changes the tone because now the dominant actor in that rhythm, in that melody, is the trumpet, because the trumpet is the brighter of the two instruments and is also the higher one because I transposed it up an octave. And then we have the clarinet. But if we have the trumpet playing at the same time, then the clarinet is going to be a little drowned out. So let's take the clarinet and double it up. How about with oboe? Oboe is very similar to a clarinet in a lot of ways. And now we'll actually have our second instrument for one of these sections. We'll go long, and we're going to do sus legato. This one's going to take in channel 2, and the oboe is going to be 3/4. Where are you? You're over here. Get sent to woodwinds, to channel 2. And then we simply paste this here. And let's have a listen. So we could, what does this sound like an octave higher? Or what if we did a French horn instead of the oboe? What if we do muted French horns? I forgot to mention this earlier on, but obviously I'm working in Reaper. Every DAW should have the capacity to do what it is that I'm doing with the routing and things like that, but it is going to look a lot different than how I'm doing it. Some DAWs have like different, decided to separate their audio tracks and their MIDI tracks into different kinds of things, whereas Reaper has one track that fits everything and can be any role. Horn, mute, sus. And this one's going to need to be down an octave or two. So let's go down 2 octaves. Now, that is one thing, one important thing when it comes to not necessarily orchestration in and of itself, but more transferring the MIDI data from your DAW to a notation software. that would be a good separate stream. Um, is that when you import that MIDI data into notation software, it's going to take the literal note that was written in your DAW and then plot that into onto the sheet music. And the way that a lot of sample libraries and stuff work is they try to simply make the MIDI data usable, or they rather the samples usable on a keyboard, and a lot of the times usable with key switches. So a lot of the times, and this is more pertinent to like really low end instruments like tubas and contrabass, and high end instruments like flutes and piccolos. While you might be playing the equivalent of a C4 on your keyboard, what is actually being played is, like for a tuba, probably closer to a C2 or something similar. And so you're going to have to do those transpositions when you get to the notation software. But once you are familiar with where the notes are being played in your DAW are compared to what they should be in the notation software, then it's just you select the whole track and transpose it to where it needs to be. It's just a little bit of extra work. It's also, you notice how I have individual tracks for a specific ways of playing. So like I have trumpet muted staccato, and if I were to have other trumpet parts, like if I wanted a not muted sustained trumpet, but it's being played by the same trumpet section, you will have to combine like all of the trumpet tracks that go into the notation software into one, and make a note of the way that the trumpet's supposed to perform in the sheet music. Again, not something I'm mentioning it just in case there's somebody out there that watches this that is going to have their music played by a professional orchestra. If you're not going to have your music played by a professional orchestra, you absolutely do not need to pay attention to what I just said. All right, I think I got this. Oh, that sounds so good. I really like the French horn. French horn is good. And what does the French horn sound like if it was instead not muted? Now, keep in mind, I haven't changed any volumes or anything. Depending on the sample library you're using, you might not need to change the volume on individual parts. Oh, that's something else I should talk about. I should talk about reverb. Now, this is another realism-related thing. We are going to open up effects. You only need to really care about this if you're aiming for realism. If you don't care about realism, do reverb however it is that you're normally doing reverb. But what reverb do I want to use? I think I want to use Convology for this. So it's easy for me to look at. We are gonna do Medium Hall. Let's see what that sounds like. This is on woodwinds. Oh, that's also not where I want this to be. I want this to be here. It's also not where I want that to be. I want it to be here. I mean, I want it to be in both places. Medium Hall. Here we go. We're going to solo this. So, reverb. If you are aiming for realism, then you need to make sure you have your pre-delay set correctly. I'm not going to worry about like the type of reverb because I am running low on time. But I'm choosing Medium Hall, and I'm going to go ahead and leave it at a 40% mix. Because of how the orchestra is laid out, the different sections are going to be affected by reverb a little differently. And that is primarily in the pre-delay right here. Almost every reverb has a pre-delay knob that you can change. And in general, you want to change the pre-delay based on what section is you're putting the reverb on. You want the reverb to be the same otherwise across all sections. And depending on your DAW that you are using, there are other ways that you can do this. Like I could just create a single reverb track and then do a delayed send for each of the sections, and it would use up less CPU. I don't care about that because I'm digitally a dirty slob or something. But for the woodwinds, I like to have it set to something like 15, 16 milliseconds. And then I don't have the rest of the sections memorized. There actually is a like a breakdown of the delay between the instruments and the reverb that takes effect for those instruments. I don't remember what that is, so I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it. Medium Hall, and for these guys, I'm gonna go 25 milliseconds. Oop. 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 I should have chosen something other than Convology for this. Convology is a free impulse reverb. I like it for things like this, what I'm doing here. But of course, it's an impulse reverb, and therefore it takes a lot of power. And when you're also streaming in the background on a computer that's not necessarily meant to be doing all of this at the same time, this is, of course, why I should be creating a separate reverb track and then sending everything to it. But I'm stubborn. There we go. And then we're going to go down to strings. And of course, I just have this violin. So we're going to put this here. And then we're going to have one last listen throughout the track, and then we'll probably call it. For strings, we're going to put it at 40. And so it's such a small detail, but it can make all of the difference in having your orchestral pieces sound realistic. So let's do a save, and then do one last listen. And there we go. That is the basics of orchestration. And there is a lot more that could be talked about. But I am out of time for today. That is our hour. My next solo stream is probably not going to be for a while. But in 2 weeks, it will be Noelle and I doing a stream together, and we are going to separately together sound design a 15-second video clip that we found online and see what the results are. And that'll be a fun little challenge because, you know, there's a lot going on in the video clip that we chose, and it's we're absolutely not going to be able to have the time to create sound effects for the whole thing. But it'll be very cool to see not only how far we get, but the different approaches that we take in creating sound for that video clip. So hopefully you'll join us then in 2 weeks, either Sunday or Monday. It really kind of depends on our schedule. But we stream every other week, hopefully on Sundays, 6 o'clock Eastern time. And on the alternating weeks, I upload a VOD of one of our previous streams up on YouTube, which you can find on Joystick Jams. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, or have any suggestions that you would like to give to us, please feel free to email us at joystickjams@gmail.com, or you can comment on our YouTube videos. And at some point, we might have a Discord that people can join. And yeah, so that's it. I hope you have yourselves a very lovely day, and I will talk to you later. Bye-bye!